Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Yahenni Undying Partisan, a Voltron deck with a board clear twist. This deck comes to us from Mac, who says, "So I have a lot going on in this deck. I want to run a lot of board wipes to slow down my opponents, and use Yahenni's abilities to make them indestructible to survive. I also want a sacrifice theme as well as to make Yahenni really big so that they can swing for lethal. I threw in a lot of creatures that give me tokens to sacrifice, hence why you see Gisa and Endrek. I really just want to know your opinion and let me know if you see any real eyesores in the deck." Absolutely, Mac, we can do that. They say that their budget is $500 to $600. Considering the deck is already above $600, I don't know how much I can help with that without cutting a bunch of cards, but I won't be adding in anything too expensive, I don't think. Well, Yahenni is one of my favorite commanders. I love the Aetherborn, especially like cards like Live Free, Die Young. I think that's the pair of cards. Just the Aetherborn as like non-binary, short-lived, like black-aligned creatures are so cool. I just really like their flavor. I always like when black is not just like a villain or like just evil, and so I like this rendition of a black-aligned tribe that just is very selfish because, you know, it makes sense to be selfish with a really short lifespan. I really like it. I think it's very cool. But let's get right into it and see what we can put together. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Yahenni Undying Partisan, and why are they our Voltron commander in mono black? Yahenni is a 3-mana Aetherborn vampire. They are 2/2 haste, and they have two very important abilities. The first one is whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni. And the second one is when you sacrifice another creature, Yahenni gains indestructible. These things together make Yahenni a very good attacker and very aggressively themed. It's pretty easy to make them into like a 3/3 right off the start with a few blocks, and then start attacking for more and more each turn. But I really do like how Mac has built this deck to kind of take the most advantage out of these kind of abilities. We have a lot of board clears, we have a lot of small creatures to sacrifice, and we have a lot of ways to improve the strength of Yahenni. A lot of this stuff right at the start I do really like. There's a few things I find a little clumsy, and I think they can be easily seen in this kind of, you know, in the mana curve. Mainly the first part is we have a lot of 3-drops, so we're going to spend a little bit of time going through those, but we also have a lot of high mana cards. And I think not all of them are built the same. We also have 34 lands, and I think I wouldn't mind going up to 36. We have a few ways to generate mana, but not a lot of sustainable ones. Soul Ring and Arcane Signet are our only mana rocks that stick around. And then, though Black Market is really good, it is a little longer. You know, it's like a long build. It comes in later in the game. I would much rather have just a little more, you know, 2 extra lands to make sure we hit our land drops to 4 at least and get the cards we want. So let's look at some of the cards. We're going to go from highest mana backwards for a bit to 5, and then we'll look at 3. Garrick's Wake, I think, is really good. I feel like it's a bit overkill though, because we already have the method of keeping our commander around through a board clear. So trying to get to 9 mana for a one-sided board clear, whereas a 4 or 5 mana board clear does the exact same thing, makes me kind of feel like I would prefer something a bit smaller. We're not playing every board clear available in the lower mana slots, and so there's a lot we can pick, and I would like that a lot a lot more. Going up to 8, Decree of Pain I think is better, but there is a theme here, and we're going to get to that with the lower stuff, of -2/-2 as opposed to, you know, just dealing damage. Though of course, outside of cycling, I think Decree of Pain is really good, even at 8 mana, to draw you a bunch of cards, so I think it's worth keeping in for sure. At our higher mana, at 7 mana, I feel like I want to cut 2 of 3. And I think out of these 3, I think I want to keep Shieldred, or Butcher. Necromantic Selection feels a bit overkill. Once again, this is 7 mana for a board wipe, and it's cost 2 more just so you have the ability to reanimate a single creature card that died this way. And don't get me wrong, this isn't bad, and I'm willing to maybe keep it, but it is very much so a luck-based thing, or I should say, a board state-based card. There's going to be a lot of situations where you're just going to cast Necromantic Selection just to wipe the board to get an attack through, and at 7 mana, that's not ideal. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be a bunch of situations where you get to take a Solemn Simulacrum, or just like a decent creature off the board, but I don't know what the chances of that are. I'd rather have a lower mana cost card so I can hold up, other cards should the board wipe be countered, or just have ability to do more things after the board wipe as opposed to getting a creature back. Between Butcher and Sheoldred, it's pretty close. I think if we're using them, I think Butcher is the one I like a little more. Vampire themed, 5/4 flyer, but these things are really good. And the ability to get the sacrifice right away through Yahenni is a lot more interesting to me than Sheoldred. Whereas Sheoldred is a very, very fun card. I feel like she's a little clunkier, and by the time she comes out, like, don't get me wrong, you get to wait. Like, if it resolves with the fact that nobody does anything for a turn cycle, you are massively ahead. But the chances of nobody doing anything is pretty low. There are some elements to it where, like, if I am the opponent that's right before you, so it's my turn before yours, and Sheoldred comes out on your turn and I path to exile, I will wait till that second opponent's end step in order to path Sheoldred, so I get free value by my opponent sacrificing creatures. But outside of those kind of ideas, I think a lot of people would just path Sheoldred on site, or just remove her so you don't get the benefit. So Sheoldred feels a little clunkier out of the 2, and I think Butcher is the one I would keep out of the 3. After that, looking at these 3, Nightmare feels just off. I just don't think this is the card you want to be playing. Don't get me wrong, this card can get very, very big, but you just do not play that many lands out of, through other cards. You're playing them fairly. And a 6/6 Nightmare Horse is just not the same as Yahenni's Smashing Face at a much faster rate, right? Don't get me wrong, I love this card. The pun is very good, but I just don't think it belongs here. So Nightmare's an easy cut. Life's Finale, 6 mana, I'm starting to get a little more okay with 6 mana Boardclears. I still think we can do a little better, but the ability to pull some cards out of your opponent's deck can be nice, especially out of, like, certain combo decks, or decks that they have like a really good answer in creature form to Yahenni. Being able to pull that out and make sure they can't get to it can be nice. But be aware, this goes both ways. Like, for example, certain decks have an easier time when that card is in the graveyard. You might say, okay, well, I won't use it against the black deck, to which I can say, what if they're all black decks? But much more reasonably is, it's not just black decks that have the ability. Any green deck has Ewit, right? And Eternal Witness goes from, with Life's Finale into Eternal Witness goes from just reusing a spell to having tutored a card out of their deck from you. Like, that's really, it can be really, really powerful for them. So I'd be very, very careful on how I use that second ability. Don't forget, you can just not use that ability, right? You can just destroy all creatures and not look through an opponent's deck for cards. If it's up to 3, I would look through their deck just to see what you're up against if you're not familiar with it, but just be careful with how you use it. We also have Cage Sun, which is a mainstay in mono-color decks, so I have no problem with this. Easy inclusion, very fun card. Looking at 5, we have quite a few, so 5 is the last one I want to kind of look at before we go into the 3s. And so let's see what we got. So Endrexar is okay. I don't dislike it, but it feels clunky. Endrexar is a very interesting creature because it can provide so many tokens, and then if you keep killing them, you can get so many more tokens. But in a deck like this, Endrexar does absolutely nothing by himself, right? He's a 5 mana 2/2 and then waits for you to cast another creature spell. Don't get me wrong, as long as he's on the battlefield and Yahenni's out, Yahenni can always sacrifice Endrexar for indestructibility, should Endrexar be targeted, so at least you get some value, but that's a pretty low bar. And I think you'd be happier basically any other token creation. There's I didn't put it into my suggestions, but there's a witch at 4 mana that makes a 1/1 rat for each opponent, or there's the Sengir autocrat that makes a 0/1 serf for each 3 serfs. Now the autocrat is not as good as the witch, because the autocrat, once the autocrat leaves, the serfs leave as well. But if you want this kind of generate a bunch of tokens right away, I would look up the witch. I believe there's a few others, at least one more I think, that generates 3 creatures on ETB at 4 mana. So I would look at that as well. I think they're just going to be much more consistent than Endrexar, so I would make that recommendation. Gulacaller Gisa is fine. I love this card, and I've never been able to use it successfully in Commander. She's so cool, and I love the idea of splitting a large creature into a swarm of zombies. Yeah, without haste, it's kind of rough. She is 5 mana. It's a lot, but I like her, so I'm not going to tell you to take her out. Just be aware of her. There are stronger cards we could be playing instead. Grey Merchant, or Gary, is okay here. So the thing I like about Grey Merchant is a lot like Solemn Simulacrum to me. If you cannot abuse the ability, or if you do not desperately need the life gain, I don't like playing Gary. Gary sometimes comes out, like Gary, your commander, and let's say like one other creature, represents, yes, gaining 15 life, but only draining for 5 for each of your opponents. And if you don't have the methods to blink or constantly reanimate Gary, I don't think you want him around. That being said, you do have the means to, right? If you get some reanimation cards, Gary's reanimation is really easy, as Yahenni will constantly sacrifice Gary, allowing you to keep reanimating the zombie to get more triggers. So in that way, I do really like this card, but you might have to make a few adjustments and play some reanimation in order to do so. Witch King of Angmar. Let's see. I never knew this was each opponent sacrifices a creature. That's really interesting. That's a much better. It's not Hatred. There used to be a card that did this whenever an opponent hits you with a creature. No Mercy. This is a much better No Mercy, because whenever your opponent's attacking to you, each opponent sacrifices. Okay, this is a lot better than I thought it was. I do like Indestructibility is also accessible, much like Yahenni, so this is a great inclusion. And I would make political deals with your opponent who has the fewest creatures, or the opponent with the greatest creatures, in order to get some attacks in. Whoever has creatures to sack they don't care about, make a deal with them and get them to deal combat damage to you. It's only one per attack, because it's, unless they have first strike. But it's still pretty strong, so I do like it. There is a political aspect to it, but if your opponents just start ignoring this card, it gets a lot weaker, so keep that in mind. Fraying Omnipotence, no, don't play this. Unfortunately, because you round up, you will always lose Yahenni. If Yahenni is the only creature, and then you need at least, if you have 2 creatures, you get to keep Yahenni. That's kind of a problem, because your opponents will interact on the stack to ensure you lose Yahenni. So this has a lot of cost to it. The discard is also, like, you just don't have the means to take advantage of this, even though it feels very, very strong. I like this a lot more in like games that lock, like Pillow Fort and the style that lock the game down and can drop Fraying Omnipotence to just like ravage your opponent's hands and not affect you, because you don't care about your hand, you don't care about your creatures, and you don't care about your life. We do care about our creatures quite a bit, and a lot of our cards are pretty good, so I feel like this is the wrong deck for this card. Really like this card though. The black card, I like it, but especially I like this card. Black Market's great, Dictate is great. Exquisite Blood is my last 5 mana card that I'm going to kind of complain about. Without Sanguine Bond, this card is not particularly good. Now, are we playing our creature, there's Veto. Veto works alongside that, but it's also not here. This is just one of those cards that is not worth 5 mana if you are not using the infinite combo that immediately defeats all your opponents, which is with Sanguine Bond or anything that says when you gain life, opponent loses life. And so with that, I think this is an easy cut. It's 5 mana. Despite the vampire idea, it's not really on theme. You don't have a lifelink commander. I would easily just drop this. This is just a clumsy card. It does put you really far ahead in life as the game goes on. I don't think that's your problem. You're playing aggro. You are playing Boardclears. Your life total should be generally safe. And whenever you feel threatened, you can just wipe the board. So I don't think this is necessary. Let's go to the 3 mana cards because I just do want to pick on them. There's this thing I say a lot where 3 mana is where our commander's at, and we generally want the mana cost of our commander to be like one of the lower bars here, because we're almost guaranteed to cast our commander every time we have 3 mana, right? So we have to be kind of careful because these cards are all coming secondary to our commander, and they all kind of interfere with the mana cost. Now here it's not that bad. 3 is really tough. In black, 3 is a really good number, and Yahenni almost always will come out first. We also have things like Dark Ritual and Jeweled Lotus to power them out early, and so we can see these as other cards. But even then, I think we can easily cut a few of them without much problem. Starting on a few, I feel that, let's see, Weaponcraft Enthusiast I think is just kind of cute. I like that they're Aetherborn, but they're just kind of cute. You don't need tokens this badly. We shouldn't be playing this bad of a creature just because it creates 2 artifact creatures. So with that in mind, I think this is an easy cut. After that, I think Renegade's Getaway is also cute. I'm going to suggest instead in my additions Feign Death effects because they're 1 mana. We just don't want these effects at 3 mana. And I'll say that a little easier. Actually, I'll say this for the whole group. If any of these effects can be replicated, oh, you do have Veto. Why did I not see Veto earlier? Must have cut off. Do I still want Veto and Exquisite Blood? I guess that's your first infinite combo. I think that's fine. I'm not going to be too hard on Veto. I don't like that he's 3 mana. So would I want Sanguine Bond instead? I don't think so. I think I would just play Veto, honestly. I think I would cut the Exquisite Bond either way. Or sorry, Exquisite Blood. And I would just play Veto, because Veto, 5 mana, and your commander is enough to take out 2 players at the same time. And I think that's probably good enough instead of kind of clumsily putting together a combo that the second you play Exquisite Blood, your opponents all gun for you as fast as they can, right? And I don't think that's a good idea. So with that in mind, I think I just play Veto, and I think that's good enough. But back to this, any card in here that can be replaced, even Vona's Hunger, like this should be Shieldred's Edict, even with the losing the Ascend off of it, it doesn't matter. If we can turn these cards into 2 mana cards, or 1 mana cards or 4 mana cards, it'll just be a lot better because then we will not be pressuring our 3 mana slot as much. We just have so many 3 mana slots. And I'll say one more thing because it's the same idea. 3 mana is a really, really tough slot. Like, think about it like this. So if you have a ton of 1 mana cards, when you get to turn 2, you have the option of playing 2 1 mana cards. And with 2 mana cards, you just have to wait till turn 4 or 4 mana to start casting 2 of those. But with 3, you gotta get to 6 mana, right? When people play 4 mana, 5 mana, 6 mana cards, they don't think of actually casting multiple of them in a row. But when 3 mana is the highest number in your deck, at some point you're gonna need to cast multiple 3 mana spells, and having to wait so long is kind of a big downside. So Renegade's Getaway, easy to cut. Vona's Hunger, easy to cut. Bontu's Monument, I feel, is a little cute here. I think that's an easy cut. Champion's Helm, that's fine. Mithril Coat is fine. Strata's Scythe is just okay. This card is really, really expensive for what it does. It is 3 mana to cast and 3 to equip. Whereas if you were playing Blackblade, are you playing Blackblade Reforged? Yeah, let's just grab that. Blackblade Reforged is just much, much better. It's 2 to cast, it's 3 to equip, but it's also 2 to cast, and just gives you +1/+1 for each land. So this is just much better. It's 1 mana less in general, doesn't tax the it doesn't tax our 3 slot as much, and it doesn't punish you for playing like Bojuka Bog and not having Urborg out, which you don't actually have. You should play Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. But further, looking down here, is there anything else? Minions return. Once again, I'm going to suggest the Feign Death effects. It's a third of the mana cost. Don't get me wrong, you can't Feign Death your opponent's creatures, but generally, these are meant to protect Yahenni. So, much better to cast a spell that's a third of the cost. And Phyrexian Arena is fine, it's card draw. So let's keep going. I think that's generally the cards I want to put pressure on before additions. Yeah. Just checking really quickly if there's anything else I want to pick at. Okay. Oh, Sheoldred's Edict is already in here, so I think I would just cut Vana's Hunger. Let's see what I want to add. Okay. Blade of the Bloodchief. It is a crime to not be playing this card in Yahenni. Blade of the Bloodchief is already a very good card. I use it in Hapatra, but Yahenni is a vampire, which means it basically works twice as good. So Blade of the Bloodchief and Yahenni and a Boardclear sacrificing one of your creatures is a massive Yahenni that can one-shot opponents. Alternatively, Blade of the Bloodchief already just turns the creatures you sacrificed into 2+1/+1 counters at a time. Very, very good. Fantastic. There's also the fun that unlike Sadistic Glee, Blade of the Bloodchief can be moved. I know this seems dumb, like obviously if you lose Yahenni, you get to keep the the blade, so that's very strong. But there's something to be said about keeping Yahenni and then attaching the Blade of the Bloodchief to something else, such as the Witch King that has natural indestructibility, or any other creature that, you know, you're fine, you're not going to sacrifice, and just through the game and regular attacks, your opponents are going to lose creatures, and that creature will get very big as well, especially if they're a vampire. So the utility of this card is just fantastic. With that recent printing, it is dirt cheap too. Kaya's Ghost Form is just another protection spell, pretty straightforward. If you're playing in black and you have a Voltron, this is what you want to play. Feign Death. Okay, so this was one of the cards I want to talk about that I'm going to describe a collection of cards with this one card image. Feign Death, Undying Malice, Undying Evil, Undying, what is the new one? Not Dead After All. These cards are really, really good because they're 1 mana reanimation spells. And the only cost that they have is that you just have to cast them the moment the creature dies. So obviously very, very good at protecting Yahenni, but you can also use this as a very good combo with Gary, right? You play Grey Merchant, you cast Feign Death, if it resolves, you sacrifice the Grey Merchant, and then you get another trigger, and another trigger for each of these effects that you have. So a great protection spell, a great reanimation spell, very, very good. I would probably play 2. I don't know if I'd play a 3rd, but these are fantastic. The other one I wanted to put in here, because you are playing Reassembling Skeleton, we have a lot of 1 mana versions of this effect. From, there's the Mardu Warrior, 2/1 for 1 black. There is the Gutter Bones is 1 black for this effect. There's a Persistent Specimen we see here. There's also another skeleton that came out recently. There's just a lot of 1 mana reanimation abilities that I feel like you're just, or sorry, self-reanimating creatures that I feel like you're not using. And I feel like they're kind of free to put in because all of them feed Yahenni, and on a long enough cycle, they do add up in damage because they're so easy to keep around. I think the March of the Dead, there's a Lord of the Rings one as well, Dead Marches. All of these can be pretty easily reanimated. You keep them around, they get a few attacks in here and there. They survive board wipes, and they come up after, so if you get in a position where you have to wipe the board, you're low on cards, just reanimate the bunch and go attacking for 4 or 5 extra damage combat. And I think that's good enough. They're really nice, and they're a great curve from one of these into Yahenni to always have something to sacrifice. Something that creates tokens that I'm pretty sure you're not playing. I should double check that. Yes, you are not playing. Okay, perfect. Is Jadar, Ghoul-Caller of Nephalia, sorry. Jadar, my goodness. Jadar is really great just generating a 2/2 every turn, being a 2 mana and not 3. Of course, the cost is that he can only have 1 decayed zombie around ever, so you are constantly eating that zombie or attacking with it, otherwise you're not getting the benefit. Still, that is a sacrifice trigger, that is a creature to die. Decayed works really well with things that check if your creatures have died, because your opponent can't just let it through, it will still die, which is really, really nice. So I really like this card. I love the art too. I think this is a fantastic creature, and I think is very, very good in this kind of deck. Something I feel like you are missing is card draw. So we have a lot of really good card draw in black. Some of them I'm going to notice are 3 mana. I wouldn't play all of them, but we'll get to that. Sign and Blood is here. Very easy. You're in mono black. Very accessible. I think instead of Read the Bones, I'm going to say Night's Whisper, which is just because it's a 2 mana as opposed to 3. Even though Read the Bones is a stronger card for the more, like, that 1 extra mana makes a big difference, I think Night's Whisper is a lot. Just keeping it at 2 mana. I will say at 3 mana, Rowan's Grim Search is worth it. You do have a lot of token generation, and if you can bargain with this creature with a token, you are getting a huge amount of advantage, because you're basically seeing a maximum of 6 cards if you want, and that's a really, really high chance of getting what you want. After that, I mean, I wanted to put at least 1 card that was a little more expensive. I have a few here. Necropotence is the black card to play. I know it's 3 mana, and I'm saying not to play 3 mana cards, but this is such a powerful card, right? This just solves all your card draw problems for the rest of the game, and with the recent reprints, it is a very accessible card at like 10-ish bucks. Even the anime one is pretty cheap too, so I do really like this art, this Necropotence art. I should probably get a few others, but overall, just a fantastic, fantastic card that, as long as it's cheap, you know, pick up as many as you can, because you're in mono black, and this is a powerful card. Another one that similarly have been reprinted very cheaply is Grave Pact. This one, I don't know if I like this one as much. I actually really like the classic one, this, which is apparently even cheaper. So the Commander 2011? Yeah, the 2011 one, this is my favorite art, and I think this is just a fantastic card. Once again, it is $10, so you might have to make some cuts or some changes, but incredibly powerful, especially with Yahenni. Yahenni just represents such a like a board swing, when you can just turn a bunch of tokens into wiping the board for your opponents, without even have to worry about keeping Yahenni through a board wipe. Speaking of board wipes, Bontu's Last Reckoning should definitely be played here. Now, this isn't a quote-unquote free board clear. There is a real cost that you do not get your lands that tapped the next turn. However, this is a cost I am often willing to pay. I very much so use this card with either a lot of mana rocks, or the ability to have lands that, like for example, Cabal Coffers, that you get to leave that untapped and still have a lot of mana on the next turn. Or Black Market is a really good example of when Black Market is high enough, you don't care if your land's untapped, because you will have enough mana the next turn. Oftentimes, I'm very, very happy to cast Bontu's Last Reckoning and then spend the next turn, basically, and the rest of the turn and the rest of my mana, setting up a board state. Yes, you're taking a turn off, but in Commander, that's not as bad, and with in a format with mana rocks, you won't feel it as badly. Very, very good card. I do recommend it quite a bit. Something else that I think is worth playing is Fire Shrieker, because Double Strike is really difficult to get in mono black, and I'm willing to pay 5 mana. And yes, I know both these last 2 cards were 3 mana. Do as I say, not as I do. But Fire Shrieker's ability to give Double Strike, I think, is very good. Alternatively, I will say, instead of playing Fire Shrieker, let's play those bronze... what are they called? Am I remembering them wrong? Let's find equipment that gives Double Strike. I misspelled strike last time. Brass, that is, not bronze. So Brass Knuckles is a little clunkier because you have to equip both. So it's 4 to cast, then 2 to equip. So it is 6 instead of 5. But if you have multiple equipment around, it gets easier, and you get 2 copies of it, and it's not 3 mana. So I am actually going to suggest Brass Knuckles, even though the other one is technically cheaper, because I think this will do better with the knowledge that you do not, you're not trying to get 3 mana again in this deck. So it's also a little more interesting, so I like that. So Brass Knuckles, giving double strike, I think is very, very good. It will make Yahenni so much stronger, and getting them to 11 power, so that double strike will kill someone with command damage, is a lot easier than getting them to 21 power for that one hit. Final card that I thought was, I think this is the final card. Let's check. Yeah. Final card that I thought was really, really interesting. So there's a card that just got printed recently of Illicit Masquerade. And this card is really, really interesting in this deck, I find. Now, you don't have a ton of creatures you want to reanimate, but you have a lot of control over what's in your graveyard and what's on the battlefield. And with Yahenni especially, and with Boardclears, Illicit Masquerade lets you play a very interesting game of letting you keep a bunch of garbage creatures on the field and your good creatures in your graveyard, and when you have the ability to slam Illicit Masquerade. After you do so, you can just use Yahenni to sacrifice your creatures in order to get the better creatures out of your graveyard, or you can just use a board clear as intended, keep Yahenni around, you know, sacrifice all of your, have Yahenni eat something, either without an imposter counter or just letting something die and not reanimating, and then you use use the board clear to reanimate, basically cast Living End if you're familiar with it, or Living Death, to turn all the creatures in your graveyard into the creatures on the battlefield. That being said, I wish we could play Living Death. The sacrifice clause makes it impossible because you can't keep Yahenni around, but this is the kind of card that I think would be very, very powerful in a deck like this. No, I want to press back, yeah. But I think this is really fun, and as a 20-cent card, I think it's absolutely worth considering. I can't believe how cheap some of these cards are. Magic has become very polarized in cost. But those are my suggestions for the deck. I really like this deck. I hope this has been helpful. There's a lot that you can do to power this up. I think there's already a lot here that I really do like. I haven't touched on everything, but obviously cards like Tainted Strike and Vampiric Tutor are fantastic cards that I love. This card is just this deck is very, very strong, and I do like it. So I'm really interested to see what you do with it. Let me know. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing more Yahenni. I think they're such a cool character, and I love building these kind of aggressive decks, especially in Mono Black. All right, good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.